versus when society develops. So we also know that that the events that happen today are not researched today, that we need a bit of time to actually do right about that. But when you look at academic journals, you will find that all the topics, or not all the topics, but most topics that are hot and happening in society are also topics that researchers write about. What we also see is that with open access, the diversity of the articles that are written is wider now. So we find that from much more from the global south, there's contributions, and much more voices are being included in the academic readings. However, that does not mean that that the research is also read by policymakers. So the fact that researchers write their research doesn't mean that policymakers also will read that particular research. In fact, the opposite is true. We do know that from a study of LSE that about 12% of the medical journal articles that were published was not cited in any way, which means that no one has read that paper. They found that up to 82% of the articles in the humanities journals were not cited by anyone else. And in social science, it was about 30% of the articles. And that's shocking, because that means that a lot of the research that researchers write is not being read, which is problematic, because we're wasting energy then. So then the next question then is to wonder why, what it takes for people to then actually read these articles. And you could imagine that academics are not writing for policymakers per se. They might actually be writing for the peer academic world. So I might write my papers for my colleagues to read. But even when you look at, for instance, World Bank articles, and the World Bank is a policy institution that aims to change societies, they found the same way. They found that there was evidence that 31% of their own policy reports had not been downloaded, not even downloaded, so not even read, just taken from the website. 87% was never cited. So that's shocking to know that actually it's not just academics, it's also the more popular policy papers that need to be read more. Now, it's not all that bad, because we see slight change in the tendency. There are researches ongoing currently. There's a blog from Cielo that is quite relevant. It's called Impact Beyond Academia, that says that we do see trends of increasing number of citations of academic research by institutions. So, for instance, they find that UNESCO papers, UNESCO institutions, or the WHO institutions, the policy relevant institutions, do cite more often in their work academic relevant papers. So there is an increase in the use of academia, specifically among the international organizations. We also know that academics themselves, and the fact that you're all here shows that, are becoming much more aware that we should write easier also for policymakers to understand what we research. So the fact that I research something doesn't mean people will read it. And if people read it, it also doesn't mean they will understand it. So we need to bridge that gap by making the readings more accessible and paying more attention to who is my audience and how do I use the terminology, how do I find the outlets that those people will read in order to make my research more usable. There's been studies, for instance, about from the EU, the European Commission, that for researchers to make their readings more usable, it's also important to think about that process from the start. So when we start drafting our research papers, when you start drafting your thesis for your master program or bachelor program, when you start drafting it, it already makes sense to start thinking, who are the people I'm writing this for? Where do I find the policymakers that might benefit from reading this document? And how do I then connect to them? And how am I able to talk to them and share these results? And that kind of a bridge between academia and policymakers needs to be made from both sides. So also what is equally important is that policymakers become more aware of all the resources that are out there in academia and are also more trained in order to be able to read what academia write. So when you dig a little bit deeper into that kind of a logic, the first question to answer is, why do people not read what we write? What is it so so big, or what holds policymakers to actually read what we write? And in order to unpack that, we started with a question in the WooClap again. So if you could pick up your tool, because we would like you to give us your opinion. You have 15 minutes of time. You're in the train from home to the university or from home to your work, and you find that there's these 4 articles that you could read. Which one would you pick? And those of you that are late, if you go to the website wooclap.com and you use the code on top of the slide, then you'll be able to join the platform and answer your questions. This is interesting. It's quite balanced so far. I think the bottom one will win. The British media is broken. That seems to be the most popular choice. So is there anyone that chose that option that could tell me why you would pick that one and not the other ones? I see in the chat, this is nice. Josia, you selected it for simplicity. Catchy title. And this is immediately visible, right? That the first one and the last one use simple words. Europe's free speech problem. Everyone understands those words. British media is broken. That's also very easy to understand what is meant with that. When you read, for instance, the second one, the freedom of media, pluralism and transparency, the words pluralism and the words transparency are already so complicated that that it requires people to minimally understand what those words mean in order to be attracted to these papers. And the third one as well, which and the second and the third are clearly academic contributions, whereas the first and the fourth were the more popular contributions. All of them we selected because they're from the same topic, but the academic papers simply have more complicated titles. And the words used in the title are not so easy to understand, and that will scare people away from opening them and reading them, because it says something also about the tone and the complication of the articles themselves. So thank you. You would actually go for the British media being broken. That's good to know. I think you're voting just in line with what policymakers do read. There have been articles in the Economist and in the news analysis website that basically have looked at the types of communication that that policymakers read and why. And what they find is that most policymakers tend to read newspaper articles because they are short, and time is the most crucial factor of their selection. Opinion columns are also read very often, also because the titles generally tend to be catchy. The more deep and reflective articles, the longer the articles are, the less likely they are to be read. Another source from the Manchester Senior Civil Servant Survey has asked policymakers in a survey what they would prefer to read, and there the findings were that, again, media reports were read, and they said 60% of the people, the policymakers, were reading those. But social media and university websites combined also scored another 51%. And the most often mentioned source was internal briefings, internal documents. And then another source that we looked at from Brazilian administrators also echoed that they really prefer to read the internal documents, but the internal documents were not validated for their sources. So when people from an institution receive information, they consider that to be useful and valuable, but they don't really know anymore what the source of that particular information is. And that, in a way, is slightly problematic, especially when you think of the quick news that is coming to us these days through X, through Facebook, through LinkedIn, where people tend to read quickly some source of a bit of information on a particular topic without really thinking what the source of that particular topic is. So it's not so much that people don't want to read information, but they don't fact check so much anymore where the information comes from. And that is in itself not preferred. So we would like to know from you, why do you think that the sources that the people do read, the internal briefings, the X, LinkedIn websites, are not the best sources to build opinions and policy on? This is nice. I see the word bias standing out. Is there anyone among you or in the chat, would you mind sharing why bias, in your opinion, is problematic?
We see in the chat that Supliti says that they are not authentic sources and the information is most of the time politically motivated.
Yes, and we might not know also.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then Noel also says that they could represent personal opinion rather than facts.
Yes. So in essence, what we would want is that, especially if we want to influence policy, that it's based on data. It's based on objective researched findings rather than opinions that may be right, may be wrong, maybe mine, may not be mine. but that becomes very subjective. I also saw the word objective somewhere in the word cloud. The word credibility also stands out. It's one of the bigger words. Can you share why that's important? Hannah, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but I'm not able to use the chat box.
Okay.
It seems like it's been disabled for me.
Okay.
Strange.
Yeah, we talked about that at the start. It's like this is really hard for us to understand why some of you are able to use and others not. Where it looks like some of you are able to use the chat box, so maybe we'll just go with the ones that are able to contribute. Because I guess, Lucas, it's not in our setting that we can change that, right?
No, I will look into that, but right now I don't see the option to fix this.
Okay, we will look into it for the next time. But Hannah, while you're with us, can I ask you, what do you feel is problematic about the choice of the sources that we mentioned?
So first of all, these articles which been posted online or in the articles are highly biased. It may be based, they might be writing based on their political what do you say, political inclination or other agendas, which personal agendas which they want to disseminate through articles. So blindly following that may not be helpful in the long term for the policy makers.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, this is true. And I think what's especially important with these quick resources is that we don't take the time to look at the types of references that people use. So certainly not everything that's shared on those platforms may be biased. There might be feeds, there might be opinion pieces added there that are actually not biased and are based on very good research. But we do realize that currently we don't take the time as much anymore to check what the sources of the information is. And if you take everything as if it's the truth, then it becomes problematic, because then we lose that critical reflection of what is good research versus what not. Similarly, I think misinformation. We also know that there's, in the current day and age, a lot of purposefully shared knowledge that is incorrect. And we also know that there's these algorithms behind the softwares that allow you to see particular types of research, particular types of feeds more often than others. So there's kind of a lock-in. So the moment you are only reading the left articles or the right articles, that's what you're being served, and it doesn't allow you to have that full objectivity anymore. At that point, when that happens, you're also not seeing the diverse readings anymore. So you're not hearing the voices of alternative people. You're not hearing different types of arguments that might oppose. And you're also not hearing the discussion on why that would be the case. So that peer discussion and the peer reviewing, the debate in itself has a value too. And I think academia is based on that debate with the peer review system set in place. So actually what we're doing here in this course is trusting you on your peer review. And we think that policy briefs should be based on a good piece of research. And we believe that both research but also policy briefs become better if we allow others to read them and give feedback to them. So we have designed the course building on those two pillars. One, we need you to have a piece of research with data, and we would want to know what are the sources that you used so people can check that. And two, we would invite you to open up to opinions of your peers in the next session and the section afterwards, because we realized that the feedback we give to each other is the most valuable one. And sometimes other people will be able to tell you things that that you don't see yourself anymore so clearly. Now, policy briefs tend to be small documents. So we've seen that time is an issue. Policymakers don't have time. And we know that on the scala of possible options to communicate research findings, the research papers and policy studies tend to be the longer documents that really require most time from policymakers to read. Policy briefs, but also blogs are shorter documents that really people can digest quicker. What we find is that the focus of writing, or the audience that we write this for, is different though. So research papers tend to be more written for an academic audience, for really focused content interest. Policy studies tend to already be translations of the academics, be less methodologically focused and be much more topical focused. And there, the audience of people reading policy papers tend to be the policymakers that have a technical or a specific interest in that particular topic. Policy briefs and blogs, being the shorter versions of these documents, are servicing a much broader audience. So we will find that blogs particularly is anyone that is interested, a whole community of readers. Policy briefs, it tends to be not so much only the specialists, but also other people that care about that topic, like journalists, like NGOs, like local decision makers, but also including the specialists that really want to be quickly informed on a particular topic. And that's possible because those policy briefs tend to be smaller and more clearly written with a different type of language than the academic language there is. What we also find is that in the blogs and the policy briefs, the focus is not so much on methodology. We don't in detail explain how we got to these opinions or how we got to these ideologies, but what you do in a policy brief is refer to the readings, refer to the research that allowed you to get to that opinion. So anyone that reads your policy brief should be able to dive deeper if they should want to, and read the policy study or read the research paper that is feeding the information to your policy brief. It is very likely that with the same piece of research, you could write all these different ways to communicate. And it's also likely or possible that with one piece of research, you can write multiple policy briefs. So it's not only the fact that that one paper should lead to one policy brief. For instance, if you imagine an article, I'm just thinking out loud here. Let's say an article about the value of the Olympic Games on viability of a region. It might be possible that you write a different policy brief for the sport-oriented community than you would write to the entrepreneurial or the hospitality sector in a particular country, because the focus of what you would want to look at could be different. Generally speaking, the blogs, policy briefs are easier to read. Policy studies and policy brief use kind of the same terminology, and the research papers are the most complicated to read and have the biggest focus on the methodology. But what we would recommend is always to only write blogs or policy briefs if you have that research focus and that research support to work on. Are there any questions on this slide? Feel free to voice it. I see that Helen, you have your hand raised.
Hello. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Helen. So, for example, when we talk, for example, for me, I need to make it in my own. I came from engineering background, so I need to make everything you talk in my own brain, in my own study. For example, I am interested or space law, space policy, how space junk is filling the space, for example. So when I do policy brief on this, how do it's just like, can you make it like kind of in my own word, so that in my own understanding in this domain, when I do policy brief, policy study, I have done, for example, how space debris have done research how space debris are impacting GNSS, like our, how do you call it, our navigation system. So how does this going to be translated to policy brief?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I do not have an easy answer. But you see, in the language use is maybe part of that answer. That when you have done your study on space engineering, probably your thesis or your academic paper is technical, and it has terminology that the general audience may not know. But if you look at what we want in a policy brief, it's clear, simple, and straightforward information. So that requires you to simplify the wording that you use from the academic findings into something that everyone can read. How to do that, I really don't always know, other than that for every difficult, complicated word, there are easier synonyms. And every long sentence can be cut into several short sentences. And not every bit of detail, the devil is always in the detail. The difficulty tends to also be in the detail. Not every bit of detail needs to be brought to the policy brief, because we still have the research paper. If I care about that detail, I can read your research paper. But for the policy brief, it's more important to think, what is the message that I want to convey? And how do I easily write this up so that other people in this call, for instance, or other people in my university, not being specifically my department, would be able to read this.
Okay.
So yeah, so part of making it readable is losing the detail, losing the perfectionism, and making it a little bit more juicy. Most of you voted the nicest title to read. That's what we want. We want to write the findings up in a way that policymakers want to read it. The easier it is, the better it is. Lucas, do you want to?
If I want to suggest a policy, for example, let's assume that at university there are disability discrimination. This is the research that came out, or stuff. If I want to brief the policy to vice chancellor, for example, if I want to say to him, listen, this policy is not aligned with the legality. So how do I brief this thing? Because my problem is this is not the policy. I'm a kind of an advocate of everything. This is not the policy, this is not the ethic. So when I find myself, how do I do this policy making? Well, I struggle.
Yes, yeah, we all struggle. I think that part is quite clear. Let me allow me to move into the next slides and give you a couple of examples, and then hopefully we'll answer part of your question.
Okay.
And yeah, and if not, we get back to it. Okay. But I guess for this slide, it's clear to know that these different ways of communication don't exclude each other. It's much more a parallel system where we should think of multiple ways to write research communications. Where policy briefs can help is summarizing of the research, losing the detail, losing the complexity, making the theme much more simple. Language of communication, use easy words that are not so much content specific or discipline specific. And what is really different from policy research compared to policy briefs, zoom in on the policy recommendations. So start a policy brief with a policy relevant problem, and then with recommendations, and try to do that in a flow and an easy language explanation. I see that Tiffany has a good point. She says, I had a professor suggest explaining the research like speaking to a group of children. my professor said explaining to your grandmother. I think that's an exaggeration, both of these examples, but explaining to your classmate might be a very good one, or explaining to, imagine that you're explaining it to a non-content expert, and that would require you to already think of different words to use. So the way we're going to group you in this course is not by discipline. We're going to mix you by discipline. You can assume that everyone in the course is smart and is curious, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But they are not all content experts to your topic. So if they understand what you write, it's likely that policymakers will also understand what you write. If we do it like this, then in reality, assuming you'll have policy makers with an interest and an expertise in your topic, read it will be easier because they will then be a little bit more advanced than the peer group that we have here. But yeah, so the 3 takeaways: summarize based on the research, hold policy recommendations, so base it on 1 or 2 policy problems, not everything. Choose from your research finding what is the 1 or 2 points that you want to make, and write it up in a very easy way. Then there are 2 types of policy briefs that you need to choose from, or that we would recommend you to choose between before starting to write the brief. Roughly speaking, you have objective policy briefs and advocacy policy briefs. When you think of an objective policy brief, that's the one that is closest to academia most often. That's the one where we would want to inform policymakers on the complexity or on the diversity or on the different options of a particular topic. We just want to inform them what are the various ways or how does a problem unfold, but we don't really have an agenda. If you have an advocacy policy brief, you are supporting a particular topic or a particular choice, and you write the policy brief to convince the policymaker that your choice is the one that they should consider. Again, always using arguments and having an underlying research paper, but the advocacy policy brief is the one where you have an agenda that you want them to follow, and not that you are the teacher that wants them to know the alternative options. Now, this might be slightly more complex. So we have a couple of examples that we want to show you how to pitch that from the start. The first one is this outline. So we invite you to read this outline. This is Francesca Alfonsi wrote it, who is a student at La Sapienza University in Rome. So we're going to give you 2 minutes to read this. And then after that, we would like you to make up your mind if you think this is advocacy or if you think this is objective policy.
Oh, this is the objective. It's the same thing I was talking.
You're muted, Mindel.
Thanks. Yes, thanks, Lucas. If everyone that has read the abstract can raise their hands, then we're going to go to the voting where you could say if this is objective or if you think this is advocate.
Yeah, we have some people also answering in the chat, so I think we're going
to move.
Go to the, yeah.
It's a tie. I think in the chat, objectives are winning. In the poll, we're more to advocacy. Lucas, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is an objective policy brief because it describes the problem in a more or less objective manner. Yeah, essentially that's the main point. It describes the problem and it doesn't try to propose a solution or a specific way of working with this or solving this issue.
It's also the terminology is neutral. So it says what's at stake with space sustainability, and it doesn't say which problems should we fix, or if we do this, we can fix something. It really keeps it very general in the wording that is used. So I also think this is an objective one. Let's move to the next example. Again, if you're done reading, if you could raise your hand and feel free to write in the chat which one you think it is, objective or advocacy. I'm going to go to the vote. This one's more clear. Yes. So why is it advocacy? This one is clearly an advocacy policy brief. It talks about a call for something, gender responsive policies, and it really says itself in the introduction that it advocates for something. And that means that the author is not objective anymore on what should happen. It really has a preference for a particular policy action to take place. So yeah, this one was you were also quite uniform about the outcome. We're doing one last one, which is about reforming the EU asylum system, a new path for solidarity. This is nice. When I just look at the chat, I'm gonna put open up the vote here. This is interesting. We're getting a debate here of what this is. I think advocacy wins. What do you think, Lucas?
Yes. Well, in this case, I also think it is advocacy. In the title, a new path. So the policy is proposing something concretely. We also see a picture, which clearly has a meaning behind. It's not just a random decorative picture, but it really has a meaning there, which aligns with the objective of the policy brief. And lastly, in the highlights, we see that the author says this policy brief argues for a comprehensive reform. So the goal of the policy brief is really to propose something and or propose a specific fix for the issue it is talking about.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And I think actually the main argument really here is the picture. The moment you put this picture as the visual of your policy brief, there is an agenda behind it. This is a very emotional picture, and it's added there to bring that emotion very clearly. But what you see if you look at these options is that sometimes it's not so clear. So sometimes it can be debated if a policy brief is objective or advocacy. But we would recommend you to think for yourself before you start writing what you want. Do you have one or two particular policy points that you want to bring across? Which means you're still going to base your policy brief on the research and the data, but you will argue towards a particular item? Or is the idea that you say, this is a topic of interest, I think policymakers should care about this, and let me inform them why I think that, without saying what they should choose. Yeah, so we strongly advise you to keep that in mind when you start writing your policy brief. So we're slowly moving towards your own exercise to write your policy brief. What we would recommend you to do is already said, it's a short document. And in the earlier slide where we compared the 4 types of communication, we said 2 to 6 pages. My recommendation to be closer to 2 to 3 pages than to 6. And that's because of that time urgency that policymakers have. They're more inclined to read 3 pages than they are inclined to read 6. So if you can do it in 3, I would recommend you to do that. Easy language, writing style. Use active tenses rather than passive voice. Be direct. Don't use overly complicated words. Don't use acronyms. Don't use words that could be considered critical. So be inclusive. Try to be selective in the types of words you use for your audience. So imagine you're writing for a group of people between 20 and 30, then you need to use different ways and arguments than if you write for a group of seniors. So always keep in mind who is your audience in how you write it. Write digestible, and that mainly comes in short sentences. Keep your sentences short. Make one argument per paragraph. Don't try to put in as much as possible. And that means from the start, think, what is it you want to make clear with your policy brief? And don't assume that everything you will find in your paper can be translated to the policy brief. So feel free to kill your darlings. You don't have to tell us all. Pick one and tell us that one argument well. And then we would recommend that the policy brief has a weight of about 20% telling about the relevance of your choice. Why do you think this particular topic deserves attention? 50% being the core of your argument. What is the motivation that you try to bring? And about 30% on conclusions and recommendations. And if you compare that to a research paper, specifically the 30% is a lot larger. So in research papers, we don't have 30% of the paper being policy recommendations, but also the introduction is a lot larger because that is needed to attract the attention of your reader. And that then automatically means that the core of the document is a lot smaller. You don't need to tell us the methodology. You don't need to tell us the rigor of the data analysis. You don't need to tell us all the limitations that you found while writing it. You just need to tell us which is the research paper that you're basing it on, and then make it readable. And then what you also saw in the previous example, make it visually appealing. If you have images that are attractive or that are representative for your story, add them to the policy brief, because they will speak to the reader if you choose them well. So now we are moving towards what we're going to ask from you. So the content of the lecture is kind of done, of the first lecture. So now how do you feel about writing your own policy brief? Okay, so while you're voting, the question in the chat, can we use images from Google? You can if they have a Creative Commons license. So always look at the licensing attached to it. But if it's a licensed picture, then don't use it. Okay, so this is actually, it's quite positive crowd. A lot of you are confident. Some are hesitant. We're going to help you with this. We hope that we will help you with this. So we're going to give you a bit of material to work on the policy brief. Before we do that, we would like to have a snapshot of your interest. So if you could give us an explanation or a sentence of the topic, that would be nice. Lucas, can we generate an image with the help of AI?
Yes, but you need to indicate that in the image as well, so that it was generated with AI.
So this is nice. Let's see if we have a couple of internal migration, vaccination. So we're moving to health, economics, energy. Oh, I love teaching sexual consent. What's nice is that this snapshot just shows the policy relevance of the topics. And that's easier than for you. So if you have a topic that is already a societal pressing issue, then it will be a lot easier to translate that into a policy brief. If you have a theoretical paper, then it's a lot harder to translate it into an actionable policy step. But the diversity is there. This is nice. Governance, mental health, wow. So the reason we ask you to do this is because we will split you in multidisciplinary and multi-topic peer groups. And that then speaks towards the argument that you need to write, keeping in mind your peers are super smart people, but don't know anything about your topic. That's a challenge, but we need to pick it up. Lucas, how are we going to do that?
Yes, so let's go over the timeline. Yeah, today was the first session. The second session is in 2 weeks at the same time. And for that session, we already are asking you to have a draft of the policy brief. That's right, Minden,
Yes.
right? Uh, a draft. It doesn't need to be completely finished, but at least having the structure, the titles, the subtitles, and the content that you plan to put in each section, maybe already the style and the images that you will use, the graphics or the charts, maybe if you have data. Because in that session, we will divide you in breakout rooms where you will briefly present your progress and your work, and you will receive feedback from your peers. So it will be a chance to, yeah, receiving already information on how you are doing and maybe correcting it or going forward for the final submission, which is on the Thursday, 5th of February. You will upload this final policy brief in the Moodle platform that you hopefully have access already. And then you will have time until Sunday. You will have 4 days to read the submissions of 3 of your peers. So you will need to read 3 policy briefs and provide feedback using a guide that we will prepare for you. All of this happens also in the platform, in the Moodle platform. So yeah, you will grade different aspects of the policy briefs of your peers, give comprehensive feedback. And in the last session on Monday, 9th of February, you will get the chance to present that feedback to the people that you gave feedback to or read the policy brief from. And you will have the chance to also receive the feedback from 3 of your peers and discuss all of that. So in this exercise is really where you will learn from each other and will really make your work better, or at least that's the idea behind the exercise. Did I miss something, Mindel?
No, this was good. You might want to show them what the platform looks like.
Yes. So now I will present my screen. So you are able to see it already, I think. You already received your access credentials. I know that most of you already accessed the platform. If you weren't able to, please let me know by email. I will be happy to help you. But I know that the vast majority already accessed the platform. So here you will find everything you need to follow this course. Yeah, first you have here the schedule again and the links to each of the meetings. That's very important. It's a different link for each of the sessions. So please use these links. Then we have a forum. In the forum, you are feel free to add a discussion topic here. You can ask questions. You can also share materials if you find something relevant on the internet or any papers or books or whatever that you, or videos that you think that may be helpful for the other participants. And please use this form to ask any questions you have, because in this way, the other participants will also be able to see those questions and benefit from the answers that we provide and also that you provide to your peers. So this is better than using email to ask questions about the content of the course, mainly. If you have technical questions, feel free to use the email too, but we suggest using the forum for everything else. Then you will find here also the course book with all the information for about this course. Maybe you will want to have a look at that to see the objectives and the official outline of the course. Then we have a section with course materials. Here, most importantly, we have the toolkit that I already opened here. You can close this to make it bigger. And yeah, this toolkit we have prepared with a lot of information and guides and examples on how to write a policy brief. We encourage you to go over this toolkit, read all the sections before start working on your briefs, because it really will give you more tips and guidelines on how to do this. You can navigate using these arrows, and also you have here on the left all the sections which you can navigate directly. So in conclusion, please give that read to this toolkit. It will be very helpful for you. Then we have the dissemination worksheet. We will talk more about this on the last session. We have a step-by-step plan for writing policy briefs with more guidelines, similar to what we've shared already in this presentation of today's session. We have instructions again. Should I open this, Mindel, or is it not necessary? It's basically the same information that we already shared in this session. Yeah, please go over all of these documents. It will be helpful for you before starting to write the brief. Here in this section, we have uploaded the examples of the previous edition of this course. Also, here are the 3 examples that we saw in the exercise about objective or advocacy policy briefs of today's presentation. So these are useful for you to see other examples on how to write the policy brief and get inspired maybe with the different designs and ways to present the information. Here we have additional readings on different topics and also on the things that we were mentioning in the presentation today. So also feel free to have a look at that. And lastly, here you will be able to submit your policy brief after the second session. So here is really to submit the final version of your work. For the draft, you don't need to submit it because you will present that directly in the second session during the breakout rooms. But yeah, this is the place where you need to upload the final version of your work. And lastly, here you will do the peer review also after the second session. We will enable this section after the session 2, and we will explain more about this in that time as well. So don't worry about this yet. Maybe please let me know if you have any questions about this platform. You can do it now or later, but yeah, that is all from the platform.
Okay, so this is an open invitation now. If you have any questions, just raise your hand or talk to us. Where will the videos of our sessions be uploaded?
We will upload the recordings here as well in the course materials. I will do that right after this meeting ends. So you will find it here too.
The second and the third session will not be taped. Well, maybe we'll tape the plenary parts, but not the group sessions. So the moment that you're going to give peer feedback to your colleagues or receive your own peer feedback, you will be guided to breakout rooms, and that's where we cannot tape it. We also don't want to tape it. It's an ethical issue that we cannot do from our university. So the plenary parts, the instructional parts, we will tape and upload. The peer sessions, we will not tape. But quite honestly, the theory of how to write policy briefs is rather thin. The learning, the doing it, the listening to the feedback and making up your mind what you like and don't like about that, that's where the biggest learning will take place. So we very much encourage you to put in time and effort in writing your own policy brief and rethinking it, and be open to the feedback of your peers. What we also very much learned in past rounds is that providing feedback to your peers makes you review your own policy brief in a different way. So often after you have provided feedback to others, you will be able to write a better policy brief yourself. So yeah, we didn't design this session and the structure with the peer feedback out of nothing. We actually did that because we know that this is the best way to get the experience of how to write a policy brief. There's a question from Marial. Okay, so your question is, what's the difference between advocacy and objective? The main difference is that if you write an advocacy policy brief, you have an opinion, a position yourself based on research that you would like policymakers to take up. So for instance, Greenpeace is a real advocacy organization. They will not inform on the various options of animal care, but they will go and only talk about the option that they think is the most useful. If you write an objective policy brief, you find a topic relevant and you think it deserves to be considered more by policymakers, but you don't necessarily have a very strict opinion on what you want policymakers to decide about. So it might be that there's a new policy. We talked about waste in space before. So maybe you feel that there's too much waste in space and you think policymakers should be more aware, but you might not really know yet what you think is the best way to deal with that. So sometimes just sharing that there is a problem and that we need to tackle that might be enough for the policy. So it's more like teaching about that topic rather than telling that this is the solution that you think should be used. Is that clear, Fariel?
If I can speak instead, thank you so much for clarifying. Yes, I am more than just finding sort of differentiating between the binary. My question sort of came more from a place of uncertainty around, how to apply these types in practice, especially given the background of my research, where the audience is not always clear. So yeah, I was trying to ask whether this binary sort of still holds more in more complex or uncertain contexts, for example, in conflict research, or whether there are other approaches to consider when those conditions apply. But I can understand that perhaps writing the policy brief and getting maybe the feedback on it, maybe my questions might become more clear in the process rather than just right now. But I really appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's a good question. I think, I think two things. First of all, as we already saw in the vote, it is not always clear from the policy brief if it's really objective or advocacy. So there might be all kinds of shades of gray in between. It doesn't have to be extreme one or the other. So it could be that you are very objective and only in the last bit try to bring one advocacy case. But if you have in mind to write one or the other clearly, it's good to think about that in advance because it will influence how you will shape your policy brief. The second point I want to make in relation to you saying, I don't always know who my audience is. I would take a step back and think before you start writing for which policymaker you would write this. Who is your audience? Because it matters what you write to different people. So let me give an example. I recently wrote a paper about educational reforms that happened during COVID. And we talked about various stakeholders, the universities, the teachers, and the students. And the learnings from the paper are very different dependent on which of the target group I look at. So knowing in advance which of the groups I'm going to speak to really changes how I will pitch my story. And I would very much not only think which is the one or two questions you'll answer, but also who do you want to answer that to? What would you expect that person to do with it? Because that will make the policy brief sharper. And the shorter it is and the sharper it is, generally the better it is. So yeah, spend a bit of time thinking in advance who you're aiming to write this for. I see there's more questions in the chat. Lucas, did you read them or?
Yes, I have been answering them in the chat directly, but there is one from Rogers. Can I write a policy brief out of a synthesis of existing policies on the same topic?
Yes. This could be a very nice objective policy brief. If you do a synthesis of other papers, then you already bring various evidence on board. So yeah, then I guess you could write it. What I find more difficult is writing a policy brief based on research that you have not written. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but you won't know the data that much yourself. You won't really know the analysis that much. So it will be harder to understand what you can and cannot solidly say on that data. So I would recommend you, if this is your first trial, to pick a piece of research that you have done more than what others have done. That makes your life easier. I see that there's also the discussion on the language. I guess in the end, whichever language you want to write it, it's up to you. But for the purpose of this class, writing it in English is needed to get the peer review. Then I see hands raised.
Yes,
Radwa,
Radwa.
please.
Thank you. I don't know if you saw my questions and will reply to them or not, because I don't see any reply. So apologies if I'm repeating myself.
Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to know if the system of the lecture changed, because I think when I applied it was a full day. So now we will have I think 2 weeks. This is for the purpose of writing. So we will receive feedback next session, or we will receive written feedback. And is the group working individual or group, because I missed this part? And finally, for the purpose of writing a paper, is it supposed to be objective or subjective or whatever we want? Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, so it's a good point. I don't think the training was ever a full day. So I think that's a misunderstanding, because the training is really based around the exercise of writing a policy brief. So we now have built in 2 weeks time for you all to engage in the exercise at a time convenient to you. But what we then build in is in 2 weeks time to have a meeting where we will inform you again on, and we will dive into a bit deeper on how some of the policy briefs are shaped and what are good ways to structure it and what are the balances between bits of text and recommendation, as well as the intro, core, and closing part. A lot of that information is on the platform, so we really invite you to go and read the information on the platform, because it's there, it's supposed to help you. And then in that session, we will group you in groups to give each other feedback on the spot. So that's not a session where you have to prepare and read the other's works, but you join the session and we facilitate that feedback provision. We will give you the guiding questions. So we will share with you in that session the types of questions that you will help each other with. Then afterwards, you upload your final policy brief, and then there is a written feedback moment where you again give feedback to each other. In terms of grading, we will not grade your policy brief, because this is really hard, because your topics are super diverse, and we don't have the expertise on all of these topics. So what we will do is have that grid of what are the elements that make a good policy brief. And we hope that through this process, you will find out that this is actually the way to review it, that you are able from each other to tell each other what is good and what is not so good. But then obviously you're the expert on your topic, so you're the only one that can then make your policy brief a better one. So yeah, in summary, the course is slotted. Today's meeting, now you write a draft policy brief, then we will have an intermediary meeting and one last meeting. All of these meetings are 1.5 or 2 hours. None of it will take a full day. And we always slot it around this time so that all the time zones can be not in the middle of their nights. I hope that answers it, Radha. Then I see the question of Susanna, which is, you wonder how to reach the policymakers once the briefs are written. That's a topic that we're gonna discuss in the last session for a bit. Because there's various ways to think of that dissemination, and that, again, it always also needs thinking in advance. On the platform, there is already, I think, that document on dissemination, and in the toolkit, there's already a section on dissemination, so it's useful to think about that before, and to read through the toolkit before you start writing your policy brief. But in the last session, this is what we will unpack, because there is no one answer, because all of you have different topics, live in different contexts, have different ideas of which types of policymakers you want to reach. So there is no one answer how you will then reach those policymakers. That is very a tailored activity. But we will give you some pointers on how you should, or how you can tailor that activity for your purpose. Did we miss any pressing questions?
And I don't see anything else in the chat. No.
Okay. Then let me share the last slide, which has the information. I guess all of you have already been in contact with Lucas on how to get to the platform. And I hope you tried, but if not, please try today, because if you can't get access, email us on this email account, vis@merit.unu.edu, because we'd be happy to help you. And then we will communicate mainly through the platform. The platform also has a forum. So if you have questions, also feel free to put them on the forum, and then you might help each other with the answers. So we can actually use the forum as a shared way of debating, and we're a large group, so there's lots of knowledge in this group. So you might actually be able to help each other quicker given time zones than Lucas or I might be. So feel free to use that forum space as well. And and email us at vis@merit.unu.edu if you have any questions. And I guess we just want to thank you for being here today. I hope it was useful, and we very much look forward to seeing your policy briefs coming. Right, and I see that Alfred says he looks forward to the recording. We're gonna upload it today, Alfred. Thank you all.
Thank you. Oh, everyone left.
You should stop the recording.
Ah, yeah.